Okay, so I have made 3 batches of bread. They are all doing their first rise in their bowls. And you can see they're growing up, as my son would say. So now, while those are doing their thing, now's a great time to do a preliminary cleaning. The only thing you still need out is flour, basically just flour. So, and while the first rise is happening, you can prep your bread pans. So, I'm gonna put this up here. Okay, so what we're doing, I've already washed my hands thoroughly. We take a little blob of butter flavored Crisco, and we're just greasing the pans. And what you want to do is you want to get this grease, this Crisco, really rubbed in well to all the surfaces, because this does 2 things. One, it will imbue the bread with an inherent buttery flavor, which, let's be honest, who doesn't want more buttery flavor in their bread? And secondly, honestly, the most important reason why we do this is it will help the bread to not stick to these pans when they're baking. If you don't do this, getting the bread out of the pans once they're done can be quite a task. But with this, all you really need to do is give them a little shake and a jiggle, and they pop right out. So you want to make sure you especially get the corners, because those are often missed. So part of this recipe is it calls specifically for 9-inch bread pans. And that's an important distinction, because if you use an 8-inch pan, your bread's gonna get really tall and it's gonna be just kind of misshaped. So you wanna buy 9-inch bread pans. You can get them from Walmart for like $2 or $3 a pan. I have 12. That way I can make a triple batch of bread easily. So initially, start with 4. And if you just make the 4 loaves of bread, then great, you got 4 loaves of bread. If you're up for it, get 8 pans though, because as you'll see, if you make 4 loaves of bread, the whole process, start to finish, from the time you first start dumping flour to the time you're taking your last loaves out of the oven, out of the pans, is about 4 hours. If you add another batch, so if you go from 1 batch of 4 to a second batch of 4, you end up overlapping your time by 30 minutes. So the second batch changes your total time from 4 hours to 4.5 hours. So for an extra half hours of work, you get an extra 4 loaves of bread, assuming that you have all the supplies. And the most important element of that is the big bowls that I'm using right now, big metal bowls that I'm using right now for the first rise. And the second element of that is having enough bread pans for the second rise. So if you have the supplies to do all the rises simultaneously, every time you add an extra batch, it basically just adds 30 minutes of time to your total time. So this ends up being a most of the day procedure anyway. So adding 30 minutes to an already 4-hour process is a pretty low cost, and you get 4 extra loaves of bread, which is awesome. And part of why that's great is, while yes, this is fresh bread, so it will go bad, although I always joke, I don't know how long it will take for the bread to go bad, because it's never lasted that long. But one of the great things about this recipe that my dad specifically did is it's a very moist recipe, and it's a very dense bread, all things considered, considering how moist it is. It freezes very well. So when I make bread, I'll make 12 loaves of bread, and we'll usually give 1 loaf away to a neighbor or a friend or someone who's having a hard time or whatever. But we'll take 10 loaves of bread and we'll freeze them in our deep freeze. And when you thaw them out, they thaw out great, because again, they're dense enough and they have enough moisture to them that they come out of the freezer quite well, and they still hold up incredibly well. So there's a lot of value in making multiple batches at the same time, because it just doesn't cost you anything in time or in supplies, really, as long as you have the pans. So anyway, I'm in my first rise right now. During your first rise, James, you're fine. My 2-year-old is still being a 2-year-old, shocker. So anyway, during your first rise, you want to go ahead and prep your pans. Part of my process that I've described It's very much about trying to be as efficient as you can, not wasting time, not, getting too far ahead of yourself and not letting yourself get behind. So anyway, my pans are prepped. My dough is doing its first rise. When they finish their first rise, I will come back and show you how we prep the dough into the pans for the second rise.